For years, Sam Heughan stood in front of millions with a calm smile, a confident voice, and the kind of presence that made it seem like he had everything under control. But behind that image, there was something he never talked about, something heavy enough to follow him long after the cameras stopped rolling. It wasn't a scandal you could easily point to, nor a secret you'd find in headlines. It was something quieter, darker, and far more personal, the kind of truth that doesn't just stay hidden, it slowly wears you down. From the outside, Sam's rise looked almost perfect. His role in Outlander turned him into a global name, admired not just for his acting, but for his charm, discipline, and seemingly grounded personality. Fans saw a man who handled fame with grace, who connected warmly with audiences, and who rarely appeared shaken by the pressures of the spotlight. But the more successful he became, the more carefully constructed that image had to be, and the harder it became to show anything that didn't fit it. There were signs, subtle at first, that something wasn't entirely right. In interviews, Sam often redirected deeply personal questions, offering polite but controlled answers that revealed just enough to satisfy curiosity without opening any real doors. On social media, his tone occasionally shifted, moments where his words felt more defensive, more deliberate, as if he was responding to something unseen rather than simply sharing with fans. It wasn't enough to raise alarms, but it hinted at a tension that never fully went away. As his visibility grew, so did the scrutiny. Every appearance, every comment, every interaction became something to be analyzed, discussed, and sometimes twisted into narratives he never intended. Rumors began to circulate, not always grounded in truth, but powerful enough to spread quickly and linger. And in a world where silence is often interpreted as confirmation, choosing not to respond only seemed to give those stories more weight. What many didn't see was how relentless that pressure could become. It wasn't just about dealing with occasional criticism, it was about facing a constant wave of speculation that blurred the line between public interest and personal intrusion. There were moments when things crossed into something more aggressive, more invasive, where the attention stopped feeling like admiration and started feeling like something harder to escape. And through it all, he remained quiet, choosing composure over confrontation. But silence has its own cost. Over time, what began as a decision to stay private slowly turned into something heavier, a burden carried without release. There were nights, as some close observers have suggested, when the weight of it all became difficult to ignore. The expectations, the misunderstandings, the constant need to maintain control, it builds in ways that aren't always visible, but are always present. At the same time, the image of Sam Heughan as the composed, unshakable figure continued to grow. The stronger that image became, the less room there was for anything else. Because once people believe in a version of you, anything that challenges it risks being rejected, questioned, or misunderstood. And that creates a quiet trap, one where telling the truth feels more dangerous than staying silent. There were moments when that pressure nearly broke through. Occasional statements, brief responses to criticism, subtle shifts in tone, small glimpses that something deeper was being held back. But each time, the situation settled again, and the silence returned, stronger than before. Not because there was nothing to say, but because saying it would change everything. Then came the turning point. Not a dramatic public event, not a single headline, but a moment where the weight of staying silent finally became too much to carry. The rumors had gone too far, the narratives too distorted, and the cost of holding everything in had started to outweigh the risks of speaking out. It wasn't about protecting an image anymore, it was about protecting himself. And in that realization, something shifted. Because the secret Sam Heughan had carried for years wasn't just about what people believed, it was about what he had endured while they believed it. And for the first time, the question was no longer whether he could keep it hidden, but whether he could afford to keep living that way. Breaking his silence didn't happen all at once, it built slowly, like pressure that had nowhere left to go. For a long time, Sam Heughan chose restraint, believing that ignoring the noise would eventually make it fade. But instead, the silence seemed to invite more speculation, more distortion, and more narratives that drifted further away from the truth. And at some point, the weight of being misunderstood became heavier than the fear of speaking out. The turning point wasn't just about rumors, it was about how far those rumors had started to reach. What once stayed within fan discussions and online forums began spilling into headlines, interviews, and public perception. Stories that had no real foundation started to take on a life of their own, shaping how people saw him without ever asking who he really was. And when that kind of narrative begins to define you, staying silent is no longer neutral, it becomes part of the problem. For Sam, the decision to finally respond wasn't about clearing up every detail or correcting every false claim. It was about drawing a line, about reclaiming a sense of control over his own story. When he did begin to speak, it wasn't loud or explosive, it was measured, deliberate, and deeply personal. He addressed the pressure, the constant scrutiny, and the emotional toll of being placed under a microscope for years without pause. What stood out wasn't just what he said, but how he said it. There was a shift in tone, a quiet honesty that hadn't been fully visible before. He spoke about the impact of online harassment, about the way assumptions can turn into accusations, and about how difficult it is to defend yourself against something that isn't even real. It wasn't a dramatic confession of scandal, but it was something more powerful, a glimpse into the reality behind the image people thought they understood. The response from the public was immediate, but not uniform. Many fans expressed support, recognizing for the first time the human cost behind the rumors they had followed so casually. There was empathy, respect, and even regret from those who realized how easily narratives can spiral without considering their impact. But there were also those who remained skeptical, questioning why he had waited so long, or whether there was still more left unsaid. That divide revealed something important about the nature of fame itself. No matter what is said, no matter how clearly someone tries to explain their truth, there will always be people who choose the version that fits their expectations. And for someone like Sam Heughan, whose public image had been shaped over years by both admiration and speculation, changing that perception was never going to be simple. Yet even with that uncertainty, there was a sense that something had shifted for him personally. Speaking out didn't erase the past, and it didn't stop the conversations entirely, but it created space to exist without constantly carrying the weight of unspoken things. It allowed him to step outside the version of himself that had been constructed by others and reclaim something more authentic, even if that authenticity came with its own challenges. Because the truth, as it turns out, was never about a single dark secret waiting to be exposed. It was about the accumulation of years spent navigating a world where privacy is limited, assumptions are constant, and silence is often misinterpreted. It was about enduring something that couldn't always be seen, but was always there, shaping decisions, responses, and ultimately, identity. And maybe that's the part that lingers the most. Not the rumors, not the speculation, but the realization that behind the image of strength and control was someone quietly dealing with pressures most people will never fully understand. The kind of pressure that doesn't leave visible scars, but still changes you over time. In the end, the secret Sam Heughan hid for years wasn't a shocking scandal or a hidden life waiting to be uncovered. It was something far more human, the experience of being watched, judged, and defined by stories that weren't his own. And the real revelation wasn't just that he finally spoke out, but that for so long, he had chosen not to, carrying it all in silence. In the end, the secret Sam Heughan hid for years wasn't a shocking scandal or a hidden life waiting to be uncovered. It was something far more human, the experience of being watched, judged, and defined by stories that weren't his own. And the real revelation wasn't just that he finally spoke out, but that for so long, he had chosen not to, carrying it all in silence.